Hey, 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 everybody. Excited for tonight? What's up, Vic? So, tonight, this is another edition of the Urban Bourbon Hour. I'm Chris, the Urban Bourbonist, and I'm coming to you live, as always, from the Urban Bourbon Bunker. Just a little quick update is that Barrell is still joining me tonight, but Will Schragus was not able to join. He had some family issues he needed to take care of, so Will won't be joining, but his colleague Stefanie Bair will be joining us to talk about Barrell tonight. So again, it should be a really interesting conversation about a really cool and interesting distillery. And actually not really, I guess they're a distillery, but not really distilling product. Be interesting to learn about them. I have some interesting questions regarding all of their releases. So Stefanie will be joining us here in a minute. I see Barrell is in the room. What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining. Stefanie, if you just want to hit that request button, I'll bring you on in. Should have come up on your screen when you entered. There we go. Going live. Thanks for joining, everybody.
I did it.
Hey, Stefanie.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for
Thank you for having me.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming on here. I know it was kind of a little last minute thing because Will had some family things he needed to take care of. So
Mhm.
thank you for last minute kind of hopping on here and talking to me and everybody watching about Barrell. Should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So I always like to ask guests before we start getting into talking about the company and everything. Tell us a little about yourself and like what sort of led you to Barrell Craft Spirits.
So I wound up in this industry completely by accident, which I think is the story for a lot of us a lot of the time. Um, I went to school for journalism and Spanish, and so I moved to New York City to pursue journalism and wound up working in bars part-time to support myself in between freelance gigs. Had the very good fortune of graduating in the middle of the Great Recession,
Oh
so lots of opportunity in the liberal arts.
yeah.
And I was tending bar at a place called American Whiskey, which is in Manhattan on 30th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue. And Will, who was supposed to be on today, who's our national director, at the time was working for House of Clement. And he was actually my brand rep for Rum JM and Damaso and some of those rum agricoles coming out of Martinique. So I got to know him just from bartending and having him sit at my bar
Oh,
and hang out and like working. And he got the job with Barrell and he was like, hey, I think you would do really well on the brand side of things. Do you want to come work for us part-time and help me out covering like some liquor store tastings and some staff trainings and things like that? And I was like, sure, that sounds great. Like, why not?
very good.
And, fast forward a few years later and I work for them full time. I'm based in Denver, Colorado now. I just moved
Okay.
out here a few months ago for this position covering the Midwest region.
So are you like the brand sales rep then for the Midwest?
Yeah, so we're called brand development managers. I mean, every company has like a different title, but
Sure.
yeah, essentially I cover Colorado. I'm based in Denver. And then I manage 9 other states,
Okay.
North
Oh,
Dakota all the way down to Oklahoma, like straight line,
oh, very cool.
Minnesota, Arkansas, and Missouri. And I do quite a bit of work on the West Coast as well, just because we don't have anybody based out there right now.
Sure. Wow. And so tell us a little bit about Barrel, I know in terms of like the product that is coming out, it's growing like crazy. We'll talk about that and like all sorts of awards that you guys are winning. But tell me a little bit about the company. Like, what's the size of the company? Tell us a little bit about the facility in Louisville.
hmm Yeah, so The facility in Louisville is pretty small for the most part, actually. We just finished construction in it last year in 2019, so it's also fairly new. It's where we do all of our bottling and all of our all of our blending. So yeah, I've been there like a little bit over a year now, I believe. I think we finished construction early last year. We have a really small.
Sorry, is it open to the public? Is there like a tasting room or any sort of experience there, or is it basically just production?
It's basically production. It is a working warehouse. We do have a small tasting room. So sometimes our single barrel program manager, Nick Christensen, will host people in there if they want to come to the facility and pick out a single barrel. We do host people there, but we try not to broadcast exactly where we're located because it's just not like really set up for tons of visitors to come through. Maybe someday.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So what I find interesting about Barrell is that the decision was made when Joe started the company, I don't know, 7-8 years ago or so, whenever it was, that he had decided not going the way of actually producing whiskey. Do not want to go through probably the expense and the construction of actually building out a distillery, and he decided to become basically an independent bottler, and you guys are sourcing whiskey and blending it. Okay, and that's all taking place there in Louisville. So I don't know how much you know about the blending process and all that, but is it like is there any barrels or anything stored at the facility in Louisville?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so when we founded the company, we were launched in 2013 by Joe. We didn't have the facility obviously yet in Louisville since we just finished construction on that last year, but we started, we were renting a lot of our warehouse space in Bardstown, Kentucky. And then we've kind of grown to this point where we have been warehousing kind of all over the country, just kind of depending on where we're purchasing things, what warehouses have space for us, whether or not there's, room in their bond for having more, valuation of whiskey like in their warehouse. And then we do keep a certain amount of barrels at our facility in Kentucky. I don't know how many off the top of my head. I'm just trying to imagine it. I think it would probably be like 30 pallets if I had to just wing it and guess.
Yeah.
And then we have our 2 6,000-gallon stainless steel blending tanks, as well as, I believe, 22 stainless steel whiskey totes that are about 2,000 gallons that we use to store product that we don't want to age or rather continue aging, but we aren't quite ready to bottle yet.
Sure, okay.
So when we first started, we were kind of outsourcing all of our warehousing, outsourcing all of our bottling, because we just didn't have that facility produced. But now we are fully in control of all of our warehousing, and our bottling line is also located at that facility.
All right, very cool. Let me ask you this, from the sales perspective, being is it any different for you going out and selling the product and saying, we don't actually produce the product, we're an independent bottler? Do you find anyone having a problem with that these days? I mean, I would think probably not, given the way that the whiskey market is so today, but I don't know. There used to be, I feel like at one point there was sort of a stigma around, sourcing and blending and bottling yourself, as opposed to actually making the product. Do you run into any people that have an issue with that when you go out into the market?
Not anymore. When I first started with the company in 2016, I believe it was, when I was working for them part-time, it happened a lot. There were a lot of people that were saying, hey, you're not distilling your own product, but it's retailing for like $100 a bottle, it's all sourced, it's all a blend. Why should I spend $100 on this whiskey? What's the thing? Because what really happened, I know and I'm sure a lot of people listening know what happened with the whiskey industry a few years ago was craft distilleries blew up, but if you don't have, like you mentioned earlier, the financial resources and the, location and all the stuff that you would need to put together your own distillery, or the ability to wait, 2 to 10 years, depending on how long you want to age it for, and, not make any money when you're selling your product, you had to source. I mean, you just had to. Yeah. And, unfortunately, there were a couple of people that weren't super transparent and honest about the fact that they were sourcing, and it kind of left a black mark on that corner of the industry for a couple of years. Nowadays, I think people are, over it. I think that brands in general have done a really good job of changing the conversation from sourcing and blending, being a bad thing, which it certainly is not. Obviously, we source and blend everything. We have great products, and so do a lot of people.
For sure, yeah.
And I think people nowadays are just a lot more interested in the category in general, too, in the past 5 or 6 years. And that leads to asking a lot more questions and doing a lot more research. And people, are a lot more open to innovative, creative concepts like that.
Yeah, and I think at least from, the consumer perspective, like my perspective, as long as I'm able to get some information either from your label about what's inside the bottle, or if I can go to your website and everything is on there very transparently, and you guys are great about this, like you break everything down. I mean, you guys are really crazy about like the tasting notes on your website are like just unbelievable. But that's what I like. Like you can go to your website and find the information about each batch, very detailed. I think some of them even mention like number of barrels that went into the batch, but very specific about ages, the state that it was sourced from, and some of those we can kind of figure out, where they are from. So I think that's, from a consumer perspective, that's huge, and I think that contributes, I think, to your success in a way, because people eat that up, people want to know it, and if they can get it, I feel like, from my perspective, I want to support those brands that are that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we really appreciate that. And I think that we've done a really great job, keeping meticulous notes on everything that we've ever released, going all the way back to Bourbon Batch 1. I mean, I've actually been conducting the past 2 weeks a lot of like video call distributor trainings, like kind of with all the distributors across the country. And the number one thing I always say is, I know that this sounds annoying because I'm about to give you a training on the product and I'm like telling you to go find the information yourself, but there is so much on there dating back 7 years that I could never possibly hope to cover it in like the hour that we have. So I always encourage people, go check it out, because it's all there. I mean, where it was distilled, where it was aged, where it was crafted and bottled, what the proof is, what the tasting notes are. On the early bourbon batches, we used to keep track of what the mash bills were. Nowadays, we're working with a lot more producers and we're blending a lot more whiskey into each bourbon batch, so we can't really keep track of that like we used to. But all that information that we always have is there. Yes,
it's great. And like I said, everyone go check out their website. It's barrellbourbon.com, right?
Yeah. 2 R's, 2 L's.
Yes, 2 R's, 2 L's. But read the tasting notes on the batches. They're phenomenal. Like the nose has like a paragraph of notes, the palate and the finish. It's great. I love that. Like I'm never going to be able to pick out 90% of those notes, but I love to like look at it and like search for it myself if I'm tasting. Like, hey, can I taste lavender in this? It's interesting.
Admittedly, like I'm not awesome at tasting and nosing. Like Will be the first one to tell you. He always tells me, get more specific. I'll be like, oh, this is spicy, and he's like, what kind of spice? And I'm like, black pepper, and he's like, black pepper or pink pepper or white pepper, and I'm like, wait, what does white pepper taste like? I can't remember.
Well, they're all in those notes on the website. So check those out. If you're out there, check those out, those tasting notes. So I know that you guys are sourcing from a lot of different places. And do you feel like, and I don't know if you would know, but like, is it difficult to deal with that many suppliers of the product, as opposed to like just having a few sources? I mean, I can understand why you'd want to have a variety of sources. You're not locked into like one specific place, and then if something goes bad, you're hurt. But it would seem like if you had, I heard Joe say you guys have like 60 different sources of whiskey. Yeah. It just seemed like it would be hard to keep all those people happy as a buyer, bringing stuff in, as opposed to maybe 10 or 12.
So, I mean, that's a really good point. Actually, nobody's ever asked me that before. So thank you. I think that, you know, Joe could definitely speak a lot more to that than I could, because I don't really talk to a lot of the people that we work with, really anybody that we work with primarily. But I will say, I mean, it certainly makes things more complicated in the sense that tracking who you're purchasing from, where it's going, where it's being aged, when do we want to bring it to Kentucky? Do we have space to bring it to Kentucky? When was the last time that we used something from this producer as opposed to that producer? But really, like, the way that Joe creates these batches, and Trip and Nick and Will now, who all, work on the batches together, the product development together, is less about who have we worked with, who do we want to work with, who haven't we touched in a long time, who are we trying to get product from that we haven't. And it's really more about what's available on the market now, whether it's direct from a small distiller or coming through a broker, and do we like it? And that's really as easy and as frustrating of an answer as you want it to be, because the methodology behind each batch is different. It just happens to be, we found these barrels, or we got a call that these barrels were available. Joe and Trip and Nick and Will tasted them and said, these are really cool, we want to do something with them, but we're not sure what yet.
Yeah.
So we buy them, and then we figure out what we're going to do with it down the road, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. And so you had mentioned, so it's interesting, like I haven't really talked much to people I've had on the show about the process of buying the whiskey, because you guys are unique in that way in terms of people who I've had on the show. So do you know, like, so you're buying through brokers, of course, for some whiskeys, and I'm sure there's direct contracts directly with other distilleries. But what you had mentioned, the craft distilleries. Is Barrell sourcing a significant amount from craft producers as opposed to like bigger macro producers? Like craft being, I think the definition is like 750,000 gallons or less a year. So smaller guys. Does Barrell source a lot from those types of distilleries?
We do, and we love working with them. I think that our business model is really uniquely positioned as like a rising tide raises all ships kind of a situation. So, anytime that we're able to work with smaller producers who are happy to let us say like, hey, we have this, producer and this particular blend, and put that on our website and publish that in all of our literature, we're really excited to do it. I mean, certainly larger producers put out more product, and we do have a certain amount that we have to make for each batch to be able to meet the demands of the country now that we're nationally distributed. So we do, rely on those larger producers for sure, but anytime that we can work with a smaller producer, we love doing that, and we do it very frequently.
Oh, that's very cool.
That's probably the American vatted malt that we have out right now.
Oh, all right.
That's a blend of American single malt whiskeys, 7 different producers from 6 different states. They're all listed on our website, with the exception of one that's owned by a larger company. But that's kind of our passion project that it was years in the making, and we were really, really excited to work with a lot of smaller distilleries and then promote them and then have them promote vice versa.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that you had actually listed who the distilleries were. I'll have to check that out. But that kind of leads me to a question someone asked here. I'll put it up on the screen. So what's the problem with putting the name of the distillery that you're sourcing from on the label versus just the state? And I think there's probably a variety of answers to this, but if you can shed light on that.
Sure. So anytime that you're purchasing whiskey on the secondary market, you can either purchase, like I said earlier, direct from distiller, which is the case with a lot of smaller producers, or you purchase through a broker, which is, obviously a third party who's selling the whiskey in between the two companies. Generally, anytime that there's a broker involved, it's a larger company, and larger companies tend to be very protective about the fact of whether or not they're selling whiskey on the secondary market. And it's not to do with us and whether or not we want to say, hey, we bought this from X distillery in Tennessee or X distillery in Kentucky, and more to do with that distillery saying, hey, like, we're selling whiskey, but we want to keep our brand identity really tight, really streamlined. We don't want people to know necessarily that we're sourcing whiskey out, and to know that if they don't want to buy our bottle, they can buy somebody else's bottle and still get something that includes some of our product.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I could see also from that perspective of like the distillery that's producing and selling through a broker, also like they may not know who the whiskey is eventually going to. You know,
Yeah.
the broker, I don't know. They may not know, they may know. But and they also might not want that end users trying to capitalize on their trademark or whatever, saying,
Yeah.
hey, this is, XYZ whiskey that's in the bottle, just our label on it. So I could
Yeah.
see it from, yeah, a lot of different perspectives. It's just
Some
interesting.
Sorry.
It's just interesting because I've never been able to like ask anyone questions regarding like the buying of
Yeah.
whiskey on the secondary market. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting business. It's like this whole thing that's going on behind the scenes that everybody kind of like knows is happening, but you can't always talk about for whatever reason is in place in the contract of the person you're purchasing the whiskey from.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a really, really cool model, and it gives us the ability to work with a lot of different producers that have a lot of different styles. I mean, located worldwide. I'm sure you know, and a lot of people watching know, we don't just make bourbon. We're called Barrell
Yeah.
Craft Spirits. We source from all over the world. Um, and in the model that we have in place allows us to have access to a lot of really cool, unique things that we wouldn't otherwise, be able to produce because we're not geographically located to do that.
Sure. Yeah. I like it. It's very intriguing to me. So thank you for answering those questions. I was excited to ask those. So okay, so from your perspective on the sales side, here's my perspective when I walk into. I have to ask you this. I've had this conversation with people. A lot of people actually message me before this interview tonight. So I walk into like Benny's is my local like big retailer here in Chicago, and I'll walk in and there is so many labels from Barrell on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So many labels. It's almost like intimidating to look at the products
Yeah.
because there's 10 different things on there. So one, how many batches are being produced every year? Because it seems like there is a lot of stuff coming out from Barrell. And like, what would you say to me if I'm a store buying from you, or as the consumer buying it from the shelf? Like, what should I be? How do I get through like just standing there in front of 10 labels? Like, how do I approach your product?
That's another great question. So I would say to just go back to like how many products we produce over the course of a year. We generally aim to produce 4 bourbon batches. Our bourbon batches are usually produced in blends of anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 6-packs for the whole country.
Okay.
So the idea there is that it'll be on the market for a little while, maybe 2-3 months, and then we'll release the next thing. And so the next thing will come out. The ryes are relatively new. I think right now we're on track to be releasing about 1 rye per year.
Okay.
Less frequently than the bourbons. The bourbons are certainly our bread and butter. They're definitely our wheelhouse. We do bottlings of Infinite Barrel a few times every month. In 2018, we released quite a bit of Infinite Barrel because it was the first year that we had released it. So we were bottling it like every month for the first 6 months because it was just selling out and selling out. Now that's kind of stabilized a little bit more as people have become familiar with that SKU. So I would say we probably, released maybe 5 or 6 of those batches last year in 2019, or those bottlings, I should say, in 2019. Dovetail, 2 bottlings per year probably. And American Vatted Malt, we have done 1 release of.
Okay.
And of course, all of our single barrel products. So if you add all that up, it's like 6 Infinites plus 4 bourbons plus 1 rye plus 2 dovetails. You're looking at anywhere from like a dozen to 15 products that we release every year.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
everything's going well, which it usually is.
Yeah.
As you're looking at a shelf, depending on what state you're in, how many products, what store you're in, Binny's is a massive store. They carry
Yes.
everything we've ever made, which is great. They're awesome. It's going to depend what was available and how much stock that store took in. Because, I can tell you, covering a whole region, I'll go to some states that'll still have, batch 17 on the shelf, even though that was released, a year and a half ago, just because it hadn't really been moving for whatever reason. But we're up to batch 23 now. I think the thing to do is, if you're standing in front of a big shelf, like check our website, or ask a sales associate if one's available because they're going to know. But go to our website, like read through the tasting notes because we don't obviously keep that on the bottle. It's too much. Ask yourself, why am I buying this and what do I want to buy it for? If you're trying to purchase something that's really innovative and like unique, I would recommend that you pick up, one of our bourbon batches, because those are going to be gone. And, if you come back to the store in a month and it won an award during that time, it might be sold out and you won't be able to get it because we can't reproduce anything. We only make so much of it and then it's out. If you're looking for a particular flavor profile, or a particular proof or something like that, that's when the website comes in really handy, because you can say like, okay, I want something really herbaceous or floral or something really nutty or really sweet or really oak forward, and all that information is going to be on there in those, really diligent tastings that you mentioned.
Yes, very detailed.
If you want something that's really, kind of innovative and new and sort of like off of the cuff, that's not really necessarily a bourbon, I would then point you to like the innovation line of products, which is what I call Dovetail, Infinite, and American Batted Malt, because those are going to be kind of geared as line extensions that allow us to innovate and adapt and work with different producers doing different things, but aren't necessarily going to be as straightforward as the bourbons. I wouldn't say any bourbons that we put out are straightforward, but bourbons have a really particular appeal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say, ask yourself why you're there, what you're looking for, and then I would kind of like narrow it down based on what is being offered in that store, for sure.
That's a great answer. I like that answer a lot. Yeah, that's awesome. I want to go back quickly to the sourcing aspect. Someone asked a question. What is the question? Oh, here's the question. How does a contract distilling approach vary from the sourcing approach? So before you answer that, do you contract any whiskey at this point with anyone okay, so it's just strictly sourcing what is available in the market. It's not having anyone lay anything down for you for the future.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say, contract distilling is when you're working with a distillery like MGP, for example, that have massive production output for lots of different brands. And you go to them and you say, hi, I want you to use like this particular yeast strain. I would like a mash bill of X% corn to X% rye for a bourbon.
Yep.
I want it to be warehoused in wherever location, talking about temperature and all that kind of stuff that comes into consideration when you're aging. And you're really controlling everything about the output of what they're making for you.
Yes.
When you're sourcing, it's more like we get a call that a distillery says like, or a broker says, hey, we have these really interesting, 14-year-old Tennessee bourbons. We have like 80 barrels of them. They're super oaky. They're like really floral. They have like really deep cherry notes. What do you think? Do you want to taste them? Do you have a need for some 14-year-old Tennessee bourbon right now? And he will say, sure. He'll ask for them to send a sample of every single barrel that's in that lot, and he'll taste through every single one of them before he agrees to purchase the lot.
Wow. And
if he likes it, he buys it, and then he brings it back. And then we figure out what to do with it after we already have it. So we're never going out and, telling people this is what we want you to make. We're purchasing what they've already made that's, a surplus or that's available for whatever reason. And then we are never going out and purchasing with the intent to make a specific product.
Yes.
It's always, this is available, we like it for this reason, we'll buy it, we'll warehouse it for a while, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do with it as we're innovating and adapting in the facility in Louisville.
That's interesting. It's interesting insight. Let's see, someone else has a question here. Do you see the pandemic having a large impact on sourced brands more than single source distilleries?
So I think the pandemic is having an impact on every brand for sure. I mean, it's really sad and, kind of terrifying not knowing what's next and what's coming. I would say, I think it's probably safe to say that on-premise is shut down nationwide right now, bars and restaurants. I don't think there's any state that has any operating.
No.
And certainly every brand is taking a hit from that, for sure. The thing that we're really seeing is that retail sales are spiking massively. There was an article, I think it was last week, that said that alcohol sales were up 55% nationwide, led by spirit sales, which were up 75% nationwide. The issue that we're having, or challenge that we're having, is that that 75% sales spike is more towards brands that people are already familiar with.
Sure,
Um,
yeah.
our whiskey is really niche and really esoteric and, you know, really innovative. And we rely our business model almost entirely on word of mouth recommendation,
Yeah.
and people tasting, you
And
know, a
people
large.
who are watching this show, like people who are really into, are the serious whiskey drinkers, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And I don't think during a pandemic when everybody is concerned about the future, they don't know how long this is going to last for, you know, they don't know what's going to happen with their jobs in a few weeks. And hopefully everybody watching gets to keep their job, you know.
yes.
They're not necessarily buying $100 bottles of bourbon, you know. So I think that the question is, I mean, it's a really good question. I don't know that it's impacting sourced brands any more than it is single origin brands, if that makes sense. I will say we have a ton of stock laid down. We have quite a lot of inventory. So we aren't anticipating, you know, any supply chain interruption at all.
Yeah.
We're hard at work right now on Bourbon Batch 24 that should be released in about a month. We're launching 18-year-old Kentucky whiskeys into the market, both single barrels and private releases. We're
Yes.
launching a new set of private release rums pretty soon. So we have plenty of product and we haven't had an issue getting any more product. If that changes and if this lasts for 6 months, you know, maybe it will. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I have an interesting question for you from a sales perspective. You do a lot of staff trainings.
Yeah.
And we just talked that you guys have a very unique product. It's a complex type of whiskey. There's a particular drinker that is buying your whiskey. It's an experienced, generally I would think an experienced whiskey drinker. How do you talk to staff when you're training them about telling people about your product and like either getting it into the hands of an experienced whiskey drinker that comes in that maybe hasn't had it, or an inexperienced whiskey drinker? Because I'm sure you guys still want to get that market, of course.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So how do you approach that in a staff training?
So the first thing that I'll say is you know, in my many years bartending in New York, I sat through a lot of staff trainings, and some were really, really great, and some were not so great.
Yeah.
The ones that I found that were not so great were from the people who either hadn't, you know, were like really nervous or like hadn't worked for the brand for a really long time, or thought that the training was just about coming in and tasting the staff on the product and giving them like things that you could look up online easily and find out.
Yeah.
So I run all of my staff trainings, you know, regardless of who I'm talking to. I start with a base knowledge of whiskey. And I do this for in-store tastings, and I do a lot of like classes for country clubs and large retailers and things like that. And it's always the same. I always lay down, you know, here's the umbrella category of whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what bourbon is. Here's what rye is. Here's Irish. Here's Scotch. Here's Japanese. Here's why they're different. And here is how we work within almost all of those categories to create all of our products.
Yeah.
And I weave kind of the story of the history of whiskey production in the world into each batch as I go through it. And I try to get some of that nerdy journalism, historical reporting going on where I can engage people with the background of what's in their bottle and why do you like it? And then we'll move from there into tasting each thing. So I'll usually start with a bourbon because I think that's the most broad category. If I have a rye available at the bar, I'll then go into the rye. I use the dovetail as a position to talk about cask finishing, and I'll sort of pivot that into cask finishing and how that's being done around the world and why that's important and what, you know, flavor wood adds to whiskey. So we'll get into like an aging conversation, and then I'll move into different whiskeys around the world and trends that we see coming up in the industry, which is when Infinite Barrel Project and American Batted will come into the conversation. And ideally I have, you know, 45 or 60 minutes to do that because it does take quite a long time to.
That's a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think the best way that you can teach people, I'm a very hands-on learner, like 100%. So I need to have everything in front of me. I take copious notes. I try to give people, you know, visual aids. And I write down like really important dates in history and talk about not just how was bourbon made, but why was it made? What need did it fit into? Stylistically, what does it do when you drink it and why do you like it? And then we'll go from there and talk about if you have a person sitting at your bar, and so they say, hey, I love whiskey. I'm super interested, but I want something really unique and different that, I've had the Hibiki 17 years, and I've had the Compass Box releases, and I've had, these cool cask finishes. What should I taste? Gear them towards American batted malt. And here's why. That's a blend of American single malt whiskeys. There's nothing like it in the world. American single malt is an up and coming category in our country that is growing, and it provides you with a platform to engage your consumer, not just with what you're putting in front of them, but with the brand as a whole and the industry as a whole. And I think people respond a lot more to that than they do to just you being like, oh, you'll like this because it tastes like cherries and you want something sweet. Here you go,
No, that's amazing. I feel like we just got like a mini staff training right there. That was fantastic. That was awesome. That was great. Yeah, that was really great. So let's talk about what are you drinking? I saw you were drinking something earlier. Were you drinking some Barrell?
Of course, yeah. I have a bunch of single barrel samples at my house here in Denver that I'm trying to get through with some tasting notes. So I've kind of been doing that earlier today. Right now I'm drinking Rye Batch 3.
Oh, well, I just happen to have the Rye Batch 3 here, so let me pour a little bit of that. So I do want to, I'll thank you. You guys sent me a dovetail.
Excellent.
You sent me the Rye Batch 3, which I know this just won a double gold.
You did.
And the biggest, baddest guy right here, the Batch 021 Bourbon, which this thing just won like every award that you can possibly win in San Francisco, this one. So big thanks to you guys for sending those out to me to taste and try these. And actually, this will be only the second time that I have tried Barrell.
Really?
Yeah, I had a friend send me a single barrel store pick from Michigan, and that was the only one that I'd ever had, and that was crazy good. It was like a 14-year Tennessee sourced single barrel.
Yeah.
It was really, really good. So I'm gonna pour the Batch 3 rye.
Excellent.
Excited to taste this. So this
have you not tasted it yet? Is it your first time opening that bottle?
First time opening this bottle, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
So in San Francisco, this just won the double gold like a month ago.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, really. Yeah. It's a blend of 4 to 14-year-old rye, sourced from Poland, Canada, Tennessee, and Indiana.
Yes, this is what's really interesting. So I was looking over like some of the areas that were blended into some of the batches, and for the bourbon, it's all obviously, to be bourbon, it's all American, but from a lot of different places across America. And then the rye, I thought was interesting that it was being sourced from Canada, and there's a lot of Poland in there, which I had never really knew that Poland was like a producer of rye. So I went down a rabbit hole today, and Poland is known for rye whiskey, which is really interesting.
I think the thing about rye that doesn't often come into consideration when you're talking about it is the consumer base in our country is really familiar with American rye because there's so much American rye on the market. The reason there's so much American rye on the market is because our early settlers were Scottish and Irish, and they grew barley and rye as opposed to corn and wheat, because barley and rye grow better in really cold climates, and they do better with really dry, finicky soil. So historically, our country has been distilling rye for hundreds of years, longer than bourbon. Coming out of Poland has obviously a very, very cold climate. They do really well with cold weather grains like rye and barley. And the distiller that we source from in Poland, they make 100% malted rye, which is really, really special. So, I mean, for everybody listening, anytime that you're talking about the percentage of what grain is in there, you're talking about your mash bill. In order for, as you know, to be legally called rye, at least in the country of the US, you need to have a minimum of 51% rye grain on your mash bill, but the rest of that mash bill, the other 49%, can be corn, wheat, malt, barley, which are all softer grains, which will soften up the spiciness of the rye. This mash bill is 100% malted rye, so it makes it really, really biscuity, really esoteric, really kind of like nutty, and really like what's a good word for malted? Like porridgey, I guess would be
Yeah.
what I would.
Um, when you said like the nuttiness from the
Mhm.
Polish rye,
Yeah.
you definitely get like a kind of like a peanut buttery kind of note on the palate, which is really interesting coming from a rye. I don't get that a lot, but it also has like a little grassiness, some kind of tea
Um,
flavors in there. Really, really nice and nice level of spice. Nice, little bit of heat, little bit of spice.
we should have you write our tasting
116.7 proof.
notes. Yeah, you're on point. Yeah. It's it's really interesting, and I think it's really cool because it's a total pivot from Rye Batch 2, which we released last year. Rye Batch 2 focused really, really heavily on that Polish malted rye that we were talking about just now. And Rye Batch 3, adding in the Canadian, which brings to the table that herbaceousness, that kind of like fennel, dill, like eucalyptus kind of grassy note that you're
A
getting.
little bit of pine,
Um,
like pining kind of note in there
yeah,
too.
absolutely. And adding that in with the ryes that are coming out of Indiana and Tennessee, which produce a little bit more of that like classic dry, spicy American style that people are really familiar with. I think it creates a really layered, complex, interesting blend. And it's quite a pivot from the last one.
It is really exceptional. That's a tasty pour, very complex. Now I understand the paragraph of nosing and tasting notes. I mean, it's got a lot going on. I mean, really,
And it
really,
tastes the more you drink it,
yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
as does anything.
that is nice. That's a exceptional rye for sure. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try this. I gotta try this bourbon batch
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
021, like the winner of all winners. Do you have this?
I do, yes.
All right, let's drink a little bit of this. So I didn't know if you knew coming onto the show, we drink on the show.
I mean, I'm glad to hear it because I was going to do it anyway. So.
All right, so this is going to be Bourbon Batch 021. Again, this one like double gold at San Francisco. It won best bourbon. It won best small batch bourbon. It won best small batch bourbon aged like 6 to 10 years. It
Mhm.
won everything.
Yes.
106.34 proof, and it's a blend of Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana bourbons. 10 to 14 years old,
Correct.
which is really nice. And I said, yeah, 106.3 proof.
This was actually a really interesting blend that we released because when we first came out with it, the original blend was 10-year-old bourbon barrels from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. And the result of the blend was that it was really, really herbaceous and quite floral. And we felt that we needed to layer in some like deeper, richer bourbons to kind of even it out, that that really like kind of higher floral note that we were getting. So we were able to pull 18 of our 14-year-old Tennessee single barrels out of our single barrel program and
Wow.
then carefully layer them in to the
No wonder
blend.
this is so good. It has
Yeah.
four single barrels that were destined to be in your single barrel program put
Yes.
into this batch.
18 of them. Yeah.
Oh, so like this batch got some really, really good whiskey put in it.
It's phenomenal. And I mean, this particular set was of these Tennessee barrels were exhibiting some really, really nice, like dark cherry, like raisin, fig, dried apricot, like kind of notes that I think for me personally on its own would have probably been like a little too sweet forward, a little too sugar forward for me. But blended in with the floral and the herbs that we were getting from the 10-year-old barrels, I mean, it really kind of all plays together really, really nicely and brings it out.
This is very nice. I mean, on the nose, I was getting like a lot of berries and kind of like a nuttiness to it, and a little kind of tobacco even. But on the palate, I got like the kind of like a floral note in there that you were talking about, and then nuttiness, and then like a nice sweet, like kind of honey, followed by a nice little burn. It's got a nice little kick to it. I can
Yeah.
see why this is so highly regarded.
This was actually when I started with the company again. So I used to work for Barrell part-time, and I left them to work for a couple other larger suppliers in New York. I just started with them again in November of last year. So I'm 6 months in now. And this was the batch that I came into the company with. Like, this is my reintroduction into Barrell. They were like, hey, you were here for batches like 3 through 9, and you've been gone from 9 to 21. Here's what you're welcoming.
Here's what we're up to now.
And I was like,
like,
oh, I made a good choice.
yeah, you're like, okay, I think I can sell this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. This is really, again, like, the rye really blew me away. This is fantastic as well. I cannot wait to like go back to this later tonight, because there's a ton going on with that pour. I mean,
I think it's also a really good indicator of what being like truly independently owned will do for your company, because one of the great things about us is that, you know, nobody owns us. You know, Joe and Trick and Nick and Will are free to do whatever they want with any of these batches. And so when we had this situation come up with 21, where we wanted to short the single barrel program, if you will, by 18 of the barrels, we were like, we're going to do it, because it's not about having a certain amount of output for each thing for the country. It's about creating the best whiskey possible every time. What do we have on hand that'll make the best blend that we have available? And if that means we have 18 less single barrels for the country, so be it. We're going to make batch 21.
That is like, seriously, that story tonight is like one of the coolest stories to hear that, and like you said, to be able to do that if you want to is just unreal. But that is such a cool story. Like, 18 barrels from the single barrel program were pulled and put into this just because the team was like, no, we need to make the best thing we can, and those barrels are going to do it. And then look at the result. It's fantastic. But that's such a cool story.
Yeah,
so cool.
It's like a lot of what we've done as a company is like, I hesitate to use the term like a happy accident. But like when we grew as a company, we became really positioned to do things like that, you know, because we expanded our sourcing network. We're working with all of the producers that you mentioned before. I think you must have asked, well, I think you said 50 or 60.
I think I heard Joe say like 60 plus, maybe less now. I don't know. That was like a podcast from like a year ago, maybe. Yeah.
I'm going to call you for my next one of these if I need like a reminder on some of the notes.
I try to be prepared for these things as much as possible. So I do a lot of listening and a lot of reading before I do these.
Yeah.
I have a journalism background too, by the way.
Oh, really? Where did you go to school?
University of Illinois, broadcast journalism.
Yeah.
Did not use it. Did not use that degree. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. It's true, actually.
Yeah.
So I also have this dovetail, which I would like to pour in that. You have that there too?
I do.
Very nice. So I heard some interesting stories about dovetail.
Mm-hmm.
So what is interesting about this is that you guys don't put the state of origin or the origins of this particular whiskey. And I heard a story, unless that's just the label that I have here. But
you have a sample bottle label, so I don't think you would have it. But if you look at, like, I have a bottle here.
Oh, it has it on the back?
There we go. It'll say in that blue square, distilled in Indiana and Tennessee. Because legally you have to put where your product was distilled on every label. Yeah.
Because I heard like a story about this, that you guys had all sorts of problems with the labeling because of the finishes on this. Like, it couldn't be, even though it's straight whiskey, it couldn't be called straight whiskey on the label because it was finished in these other barrels. And when you can call those all separately straight, but when you combine them, you can't. And so I heard like a whole big deal over the labeling of this, and like and actually categorizing this whiskey. I don't know if this is still the case, but at one point in time, it was technically not in the whiskey category because it was considered a distilled spirits specialty because of
Correct.
how it was blended and the finishes. And there was like no category to put that kind of whiskey into.
Yeah, it still is.
Okay.
It's a really funny thing. So when we decided to start expanding the company out beyond bourbon batches, which was in about 2016, we started releasing a line that we called Barrell Whiskey. And Barrell Whiskey was the same concept as Barrell Bourbon. It was blends of American whiskeys that couldn't legally be called bourbon or rye because of how they were produced, whatever the case may be, and then blended together and then bottled and done as limited edition, unique runs of batches. We made about 5 of them. And then in 2018, we hit a snag with Whiskey Batch 6, which was that the TTB was telling us you can no longer put barrel whiskey on this label because there are too many finishes going on. Like, you have to call this something else. So we fought with them for like 4 months over this. I don't know if anybody from the TTB is watching right now, probably not. It depends who is answering the phone, you know, or, at the computer whenever you're submitting these requests. Because we've had situations happen where we'll submit a label and it'll get rejected, and then we'll wait a week, we'll submit it again, and it'll get approved. And we didn't change anything. I mean, it just really was whoever was interpreting what we were submitting that day. In the case of Dovetail, over the course of 4 months, they just kept being like, nope, you got to call it something else. So we decided to rename the line to Dovetail because Joe was in a Home Depot and he was frustrated with the TTB situation, and he overheard somebody talking about dovetail joints. Yeah. Which are, in case anybody watching doesn't know, I certainly didn't. It's a type of wood joint that you create that's like tapered, finished, etches. So 2 pieces of wood can perfectly fit together. Yeah. Without wood glue or nails or anything. And so he was like, okay, we'll just rename it Dovetail. And what that meant was that it shifted from being whiskey printed on the label to being a DSS. And we've done 5 bottlings, I believe, of Dovetail now at this point. And it is still a DSS. We still cannot put whiskey on the label. Although it is always a blend of 10-year-old Indiana whiskey and 11-year-old Tennessee bourbon. So there's no product in there that isn't legally a whiskey. It's just the way the TTB is interpreting the labeling laws at the time.
Yeah, and those finishes, like throwing them off for some reason because they don't have a category for it. Yeah. But this is, so I don't know if you can tell me what batch, do you number these batches on Dovetail?
We do, we number the bottlings, yeah.
Okay, so this one is the 124.34 proof. I don't know if you know what, it doesn't really matter, but.
No, I can look it up. So
this is, so for everyone, it's 124, what I have is 124.34 proof, and it's whiskey finished in rum, port, and Dunn Vineyards Cabernet barrels. So 3 different finishes, and I'll tell you, this is really, really tasty.
It's funny because this whiskey was actually, like, Dovetail as a concept was a joke originally that Will had with Mike Dunn, who owns Dunn Vineyards, who we get the Cabernet barrels from. For everyone watching, Will hates talking about himself, but I don't mind saying that he used to be a buyer at Zaki, which is a really large retail store in upstate New York, and I think it's in Scarsdale, but it's one of the biggest retail stores in the country. And so he knows just a lot of producers from being a buyer there. And he was on vacation in the summer of 2018 in Napa. He was at Dunn drinking some wine, and he made a joke like, hey, why don't we make a whiskey finished in Dunn cab barrels? And Mike Dunn just happened to walk into the room, and he was like, okay, let's do that. What do you need from me? And Will was like, wait, really? Is that like really for me? And Mike was like, sure, what do you need? And he was like, barrels? And he was like, okay. So we have this situation worked out where they just send us barrels and then we just send them whiskey, and like it just kind of works out perfectly.
This is another cool story that we learned here tonight. That's really cool. How you happen to get those barrels. That's a really cool story.
Yeah, and it was actually, it was meant to be a one-off. I mean, at the first batch that we produced of it was released in December of 2018, I believe, and it was 600 cases, 600 6-packs for the whole country. And then it was so incredibly popular that it sold out like immediately. So we did 2 more bottlings of it at 1,000 6-packs per bottling that also sold out immediately. And it was a really interesting thing for our company because it was the first time that we had ever released something that people were like, make more of this. We don't want you to innovate. We want more of this product. And we were like, and we had the ability to do it because it wasn't about a specific flavor profile of bourbon that we could only get so many barrels.
Right.
It was more about the way we were doing the finishings. I will say to anybody watching, on the bottle, you can tell what bottling, I'm trying to look it up for you right now, but I can't find it, so I'm really sorry.
That's all right. There's no big deal.
The bottling date, or the number of the bottling, is stuck right here into this little D. Can you see the 4? So this little D has a 4 engraved in it. So if you're ever in the store and you want to know what bottling you have, it'll be right here.
So it's kind of like hidden there on the label.
That's our little clap back to the TTB for not letting us put batch numbers on
that.
it.
I like that a lot. Another good story. But this is, so I'll be honest, normally a finished whiskey, they're just not for me. But honestly, if I was tasting this blind, I wouldn't even know if I would pick up on those finishes, because I think they're just adding just this great flavor profile to the whiskey that went into the barrels that, like, I don't think I would know. Like, I don't think I would be able to say, oh, there's definitely a rum finish whiskey in there. They all meld together, like, really, really, it's like, that's really crazy how they blended this.
It's a really great example too of the methodology of the company, because I think the conception that people have with this product is that it's one whiskey with 3 different finishes on it. But what we actually did was we took the 10-year-old Indiana whiskey and the 11-year-old Tennessee bourbon, and we gave each of those a different barrel finish, and then we blended the barrel finishes together. So it's not only a blend of 2 different ages, of 2 different states, of 2 different types of whiskey, but it's also a blend of 3 different barrel finishes, which is really cool.
Super cool. And like, I just feel like it's amplifying the whiskey, and like, you do not get any overpowering like flavor from those barrels, like taking over. It's just such a good compliment. It's really, man.
This is the one that I tell people is like the crowd pleaser, I think. Like, anytime I'm doing an in-store tasting, or I'm at a whiskey fest or something and I'm showing the full lineup on the table, if somebody says, I want to try something but I don't know where to start, I start them with Dovetail.
Yeah,
because it's always guaranteed they're going to like it.
It is such a great expression. Wow. Again, thank you guys for sending those to me. 3, I mean, how about that lineup? The batch 3 rye, the batch 021 bourbon, and then the Dovetail. Really, really excellent. But Stefanie, we're running up against our hour. I want to thank you. That went so fast.
Really fast.
I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know it was last minute notice, but it was really fun talking to you. You had some really great stories to tell us tonight, and like the staff training you gave us was top notch as well. And then being able to taste these 3 whiskeys, and really kind of like, this is really my first real exposure to barrels. So kudos. I mean, really great products, and thank you so much for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find out more about Barrell. Website, social media.
Absolutely. So, I mean, of course, our website, barrellbourbon.com, that we were saying earlier, is the treasure trove of information of all of the releases we've ever produced. That's barrellbourbon.com. Our Instagram handle, which I am logged into right now, I don't know if people can see it, but it's Barrell Bourbon with 2 R's and 2 L's. Our Facebook is the same, Barrell Bourbon. And yeah, I would encourage you to follow us on all of our channels, check out our website. And we've been working really hard, at the moment. Our jobs are usually 75% travel, but right now everybody's grounded due to the virus. So our online engagement has been really, really up and really, really high. So if people have questions, they want to leave a comment, they want to send us an email, we're responding to everybody right now. We're happy to engage with everybody and tell everybody as much as we can about our products. And thank you for joining us. That's
awesome. And so again, everybody, this is Stefanie Bair. And Stefanie, what is your title again with Barrell?
Brand Development Manager.
Brand Development Manager from Barrell Bourbon. Stefanie, thank you so much for coming on. Really fun conversation. It was fun tasting these with you and getting a little bit more information from you on each of those. So really fun night. Thank you again, and hope you have a really great weekend.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining tonight. I think that was a really fun conversations. Stephanie, super, super smart, really shared some great stories, had some great insights. Really fun guest, really excellent whiskeys, and this is my kind of like